Is this your next mayor? I'm here with Josh Matlow, who is running to be our next mayor. So I'm going to turn the camera over to him so that you have an opportunity to talk about yourself. So Josh, why are you running for mayor?
Well, thank you for asking. And good morning.
Good morning, yes.
Well, I'm running for mayor because I have not only been a member of city council for a few years now.
2010, right?
Yeah, 12 years, 13 years. But, you know, as a resident of the city, as a dad, as, you know, a member of a community that has seen services decline for many years, infrastructure crumble. You know, I see the roads in disrepair. I see, you know, when we try to get Molly, my daughter, into a rec program, it's like playing Olympic Games, even trying to sort of click, trying to get her into a spot.
Yes. What is it? Like, may the force be with you, or what the you know, the Hunger Games.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that we've fallen into a malaise in a way in Toronto under the past couple of administrations, where we just, you know, think that's how things have become and that's the way they are, but they don't have to be. You know, we can have a city that works a lot better for people. You know, I believe that if we just invest in our priorities, whether it be our infrastructure, the many services we rely on, like even like just park bathrooms being fixed and open, like things like that that we rely on, that can happen if we choose to make it happen. And so that's why I might be the, you know, maybe the only mayoral candidate in our history to announce that that I'm going to be supporting a property tax raise of 2% to create a city works fund. Okay. And the reason that I'm doing this is I think it's important to be upfront with people about what you're doing and how you're going to do it. Mm-hmm. But also, we just can't keep pretending that everything's going to solve itself. You know, that's what we've been doing, and it hasn't worked. Things have been declining. I want to invest in the specific services that we rely on every day, including for those who don't always have the same voice as many other people do. We have a homelessness crisis.
Yeah, for sure.
We have people who are struggling. We have kids who are getting killed. And we have leaders who just always do those sort of very simple, I'm going to do something now about it, rather than do what has been advised for years out of reports like the Roots of Youth Violence and other reports that have just told us what we need to do. But there hasn't been that investment in the will to actually go there. So that's what I want to focus on, ensuring that our youth, in particular, who are at risk in our neighborhoods, have opportunities, trauma counseling, and on our TTC, for example, along with our, you know, our society in general. I want to make sure that there are ways for people who are struggling to proactively and preventatively have the care and the help that they need so that they are well themselves, but that we also, you know, de-escalate any potential for violence that might happen in the future. There are things that we can do if we choose to do them, if we're honest about how to pay for them and what our priorities are. And I've just seen the city not only focus on many of the wrong priorities, but not invest in the ones that actually are important. And I just, you know, I'm not going to be a mayor that goes on TV every day and tells you that everything's great and I'm doing a great job. We'll make announcements once we get results, but I'm not going to announce that everything's fine before it is. And I just think that that's a different approach, but is one that is necessary to really make things better in a more genuine way.
Wow, that's awesome. That's great. I mean, I think that's really honest and really gets to the heart of what you would bring to city. Like, I mean, as mayor of city council, of a city that is in need of so much. Like, you know, one of the things I wanted to ask, as I'm asking all the mayoral candidates, is Toronto, what's the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And you've kind of touched on all of that. And I want to invite you to elaborate on any of those more specifically. I mean, I'm a Torontonian. I love Toronto.
Yeah.
You do too, right? You're a fierce advocate. So in your own words, what do you think makes Toronto awesome?
There are so many things that make Toronto awesome. I mean, that's why even when we point out the bad and the ugly, The whole point of doing that is so that we can fulfill our promise, that we can meet our potential, because there is so much good. You remember like during the pandemic when everyone was just scared and isolated and feeling alone? The ways that people would do porch concerts and, bring people together in a way that was safe, but took care of each other. When people were in quarantine, neighbors would just check in on them to see if they needed any groceries. That's who we are. We bang the pots for the healthcare workers. That's who we are.
Yeah.
And as much as I focus on City Hall because I want to represent us there, a lot of the strength and the goodness in the city just comes from people, people just supporting each other. Last night I was in Etobicoke with a group of members of the Somali community who both want to partner with City Hall on building a community center, and they want to have more mental health care supports and other types of supports for their kids. But they're not waiting for City Hall. They're coming together to support each other's mental health well-being and looking for ways to build a community together. That's the goodness of Toronto. I'd also add that we just live in a city that is so diverse, and I know it's so like hyperbolic when we talk about that sometimes, but we have to remember not to take that for granted. We live in a city that reflects the entire world. We are the world within a city.
Sure.
We, whether you love music, food, traditions, cultures, learning about people who have different lived experiences than what you've experienced, this is a city to have that and enjoy that and celebrate our differences.
Yeah.
So now the bad is that, like I said earlier, there are too many people in this city who aren't really part of us when we discuss us sometimes at City Council. We had a big debate over TTC safety, which is necessary. It could be the most focused on issue of this election. But I also can't ignore the fact that we collectively don't have the same sense of emergency and crisis when we think, or perhaps don't think enough about people who are living on our streets, people who are vulnerable in our city. Over the past 2 years, 500 people died in our shelters. Why isn't that a crisis?
Yeah.
Why aren't we having big emergency meetings about that? So we really do need to get real about what us means. And I don't think that we've done a good enough job. I think that's really bad. That people who are doing well, and people who are unwell are often forgotten. And we need to make sure that they're included in a meaningful way where they have opportunities and supports so that they can be well and they can feel like they're one of us and in fact be us together. And the ugly is that, perhaps that described part of the ugly as well, is that for far too long, I've witnessed many of our leaders, mayors, councillors, and others, not everyone. We have some remarkable representatives who I have a lot of respect for and I work very closely with. But just together, and too many, I think have put interests other than the well-being of our city first. They get worried about taking risks. When I talk about, for example, raising revenue, that's always, nobody wants to talk about, especially during elections.
Yeah.
But we have to, we just have to be honest about what it will take to help people and help our city and make it work. Because I do believe a better Toronto is possible, but we need to be honest about how to achieve that. And I also have seen hate grow in our city, in particular during the past 3 years, I've noticed, during the pandemic. And then, not that this was from Toronto, but it affects us, where the Trumps of the world and others provide allowance for hateful speech and attacks.
Yeah.
It gives cover to those who feel more comfortable to go out there and say it aloud and go after people. And we need to when we talk about diversity or strength, it's got to be more than our slogan or our rhetoric. We need to do what we can together to make sure that every community, including our Muslim community, for example, who just had an attack on one of their mosques a day ago, know that we've got each other's backs. And I see, if I'm going to define ugliness, I see hate as ugly. And I also see, and this isn't always hate with a forceful attack, I see how seniors are often subject to ageism and infantilized in our society. And forgotten and warehoused. I see people with disabilities who aren't included in our discussions, let alone policy, to ensure that they have genuine access to services and buildings and parks. So I want to design a city that is both age-friendly and accessible and respectful to all. And that goes everything from how we design our public spaces to, actually clearing the snow of sidewalks in the winters. What an idea that would be in a Canadian city.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, look, everything that you're saying, I resonates simply because I am Chinese. I come from a family where multi-generational, home settings, and looking at the world that we live in now, housing is a challenge, right? Where people, whether people want it or not, but more and more Canadians are like, I'm living at home because it's too expensive to live elsewhere. And obviously, I think this is a multi-level, government situation. Like, everybody has to be thinking about this because housing, is something that is so fundamental to all things. But I also think that what you're saying, recognizing those who are seen and those who are not seen and the voices, what do we need in a mayor? Right? And I think that's the question that many people are asking. And this is why I'm, interviewing top mayoral candidates, because I feel that everybody brings something to the table. And that ability to recognize, and even the honest conversation that you're having, we can't do things that we want to do without funds to support it. Absolutely. Where is it going to come from? Like a household budget, right? You've got to make those decisions and you've got to do it honestly. And when you're struggling as a household, some rhetoric or a good line on TV won't actually solve your problems. You actually, unlike politics, right? You actually have to deal with it. And, sorry, apologies. No, please. But I think you're right, because I think a lot of people have felt that people just say things and it sounds good and it's a good soundbite. And I really appreciate this opportunity that we have, because I would like people who are trying to decide, hey, what are we looking for in our next mayor? I think a lot of people don't even know what they should be looking for. I would suggest electing a mayor, and this is my aspiration for my own campaign, that's honest, that any announcement that they make, they can actually point to how they're actually going to realize it, how they're going to fund it. I've seen some other campaigns, without deriding any one of them, but I've just seen some, not just in this election, but others, where they come up with some pie in the sky, this is how we're going to fund it, but it's not actually real. And I would definitely encourage critical thinking when it comes to, watching election campaigns roll out. It's got to be real. And somebody who will stand up for Toronto. When it comes to housing, I think it's time that we change our policies and our zoning to allow for more options in our neighborhoods, where the missing middle, who are often, that can be anywhere from younger people who there's just no price point. There's no price point. They make a decent living, but there's just no price point to ever realistically buy a home. And that includes multiplexes and other ways to have different units in a home, which both serve younger people, but also older adults who may be house rich but poor. Their pensions aren't keeping up with inflation and would love for their family or others to be able to share units in the house that they have today. And then everybody wins, right? And maybe it also contributes to their well-being and socialization and helping with chores. It's a good model. It's a holistic approach. Totally. Yeah. Right. And I don't think we're good at that in this society. And I think that we should be. I also believe that
the way that past mayors have taken a bit of a go along to get along approach with the other levels of government. And I'm not suggesting that we always fight, because we can't. In fact, Toronto is a creature of the province. So I recognize, legally, I mean. So, I recognize that when Doug Ford and his government meaningfully want to do something in support of our city, my job will be to roll up my sleeves and work with them and achieve those common goals and applaud them when they do the right thing.
Yeah.
But when it comes to selling off our greenbelt to their friends, when it comes to privatizing our waterfront at Ontario Place, when it comes to not investing in our transit system to make it the world-class, so to speak, system we want it to be, but it isn't today, we need a mayor who will say that out loud and take a stand and then creatively find ways to ensure that we use every leverage possible to achieve our goals on behalf of Torontonians. We haven't had that for a long time. I don't see that in everyone putting their, signing up to run.
Yeah.
Some are very close with the government, and we don't need an agent of the province either. We need somebody who will be independent on behalf of Torontonians. I believe that describes me, and that's part of the reason that I'm running, because I want to take a stand for this city.
Absolutely. I mean, look, everything that you're saying resonates really well in the sense of, as a local councillor, I have seen you advocate fiercely for your constituents.
Thank you.
And that is something where, you will, like, you set up a tenants helpline, right?
Yeah.
Like, because you wanted people to have a first line to reach out.
Yeah.
And, the thoughtfulness behind when a school goes down or a school is in disrepair, like, this is something on a provincial level. We know that we need to fix our schools, right?
Yes.
This is also with community housing.
Absolutely.
We know that a lot of these homes, like, capital investments for infrastructure have to be set aside.
Yes.
And, yes, let's build it. Great. But wait a minute, we got to maintain it, right? And I know that in your ward, that was certainly something that had come up with regards to the high school that had to be taken down, but then working with developers to find a solution.
And there are ways to find solutions. I know that, some will say that I'm an outlier at City Council. In many ways, that's true, because I haven't taken the same approach as others. I haven't just kind of been part of the mayor's team so I can get a committee appointment or that kind of thing. But I've always found creative ways to get things done, whether it be the youth equity strategy, the senior strategy, and like you were just describing, whether it be the rebuild of North Toronto Collegiate or the new Davisville School and the Davisville Community Center, where we're going to have an aquatic center in Midtown, along with the work that we've done in Little Jamaica to start, investing in a meaningful way, supporting local residents who want to start farmers markets and bringing life and pride back to the area that has not been a focus of the city for too many years. There are always ways to get to a yes if you're willing to get to a yes, and if you find partners who want to work with you to achieve those goals. So, I'm going to say something to those of you who are watching who. This may even bore you for a moment, and I apologize for doing so, but what I'm about to say is most likely the most important thing that I will through this entire interview. But you won't hear about this during debates a lot because numbers make people's eye rolls. But here's the importance of investing in our infrastructure. We've been left with a $1.5 billion shortfall in our budget. The last administrations, because they were not honest with Torontonians about the revenue side of our necessities, have raided our reserves. There's nothing left. The cupboards are bare at City Hall. There's no gravy left. It's done. And moreover, there's a $46 billion budget pressure over the next 10 years. What does this mean in reality? If we don't get real about what it will take to invest in our infrastructure along with our services, they will continue to crumble, erode, and decline to a point that some will be unsalvageable and others will be just more expensive in the long run. Just like if you don't fix a leaky roof, it'll collapse one day if you don't take care of it. That's what Toronto has been left like. And I know it's hard to see sometimes, But I think that if you take a closer look at our parks and at our roads, if you take a look at the services that we rely on, we know it's true. We know we can do better. And that's really the focus of not only my campaign, but I said to my team the other night, if Torontonians choose us, we'll have a victory party for a wonderful evening. And then the very next day, we're going to have to face these challenges because they are enormous, they're abundant, but they're real. And my job will be to, not tell people what they want to hear anymore, but just be honest about what we need to get done and work with people to achieve it.
That's great.
Thank you.
No.
Thank you.
I think it's hard hitting because it's an election time. So there's a lot of shininess. There's a lot of hope. There's a lot of, dreaming. But I think there's also what you just spoke about was the reality.
Yeah.
And I think it's important. I appreciate you saying this is something that's really important to understand of why Torontonians need to really consider who they're voting for and why.
Yeah. Right?
Instead of empty promises and digging a little bit deeper.
Yes.
I don't know because who knows, how people think. I think COVID has also, in the last 3 years, as you mentioned earlier, has impacted people in so many ways. And life is more expensive. We know that inflation has increased. We know that going to the store to buy food, people are like, how am I going to make ends meet? Right? Because we know there are families out there where the cost of rent or the cost of their mortgage has gone up so high that they're like, I have to choose between a roof over my head or food on the table or whatever else their choice is, childcare and all of those things. Right? As parents, we're both parents.
And while they're doing that, they are seeing the government remove rent control on all new apartments built in this province.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're hit by a surprise above the guideline rent increase, which was not part of their budget.
Yeah.
And they've got no way to do that.
Yeah.
That might mean they have to leave their neighborhood, their community.
I'm seeing that. I see that 100%. I mean, the reality is when I have clients who reach out to me saying, look, I need to find a new place to live because, for instance, and this has happened to really good people who have good paid, who have good jobs, my landlord just raised it by $400 a month. They have no choice.
That's not reasonable.
And it's like, who can budget for that? And one of the things I always ask people is okay, look, if you want something shiny, it's not rent controlled. Something brand new and shiny, which has all these amenities, it's not rent controlled. But I will say I'm always 100% biased. I think we need to get most value and more space. And that's usually older stock properties. Mm-hmm. But there's a double bonus. There's some rent control there.
And I don't think we've actually done a good enough job at finding the opportunities with the development that we've seen in this city. It's gone to extremes, right? Either we're talking about building affordable housing, which has not really happened in any substantive way. Right. Even, that signature plan that you heard from the city housing now, 9 years later, not a single shovel in the ground. It hasn't happened. It's failed so far. So, but think of all the money that's coming into the city through development.
Yeah.
Rather than just have a dynamic where, all development is good or all development is bad.
Yeah.
What if we work with the industry in a way where we say, we're going to build so many affordable homes. We're going to make sure that we've got more price points in our neighborhoods. We're going to build social housing. We're going to be using public lands, even sometimes using a public builder to achieve those goals so that we can just get it done and set our own restrictions on price. And then what if we also work with them to use the community benefit charges in a meaningful way, not just scattering around, but toward the real key priorities in our city, toward getting those community centers built and those, health centers and things that people need. Yeah. If we did that well, then we can talk about, what does the industry need to address their concerns around risk and where do they want to go? Yeah. Maybe we can look at development charges, for example, and rebalance them. What if overachieving areas they pay what they do now or a little bit more. Maybe underachieving areas like Scarborough Town Centre and elsewhere, we say, we're not even going to charge you a DC for a while, a development charge, right?
Yeah.
We want to incentivize that growth, and then we can use the benefit charges toward improving people's lives, affordability and services and infrastructure. None of that's happening.
Yeah.
And I've been advocating for that, and I'd love the opportunity to see if we could work with partners to realize that.
No, and I hear you, because when I speak with developers, they're like, wait a minute, the way that the approach that is happening now is like, we're being penalized to actually do work. And so, obviously there's always context that is important to the conversation. Mm-hmm. And so I think the lens that you're bringing and what I'm hearing you say is that it's not a one size fits all. It actually has to be based on the context. It has to be based on the need, and it has to be based on how quickly a need can be met, et cetera.
Absolutely. And, I learned a lesson from my parents in a negative way when I was a kid. They were always fighting with each other. They loved each other, but they fought. And sometimes they would say things to each other that were awful. And it got to a point where I learned a lesson when I was a kid watching this roll out, where the win wasn't about telling the other person how wrong they are or how bad they are.
Right.
The win in a relationship is coming back together to resolve things.
Yeah.
And now, just so you know, on a personal note, while they did divorce, they became best friends because, ironically, the marriage wasn't in the way of their friendship. So we had that. But the lesson remained with me. And I just see, like, for example, with many developers, yes, we have had fights over, the benefits for the community, and my job was to advocate for the community. But I always knew, and they knew too, that the win was the resolution.
Yeah.
Because if both of us feel like we actually win, the community wins. And that's the goal.
Yeah.
And that's going to be my approach.
I love it. I mean, honestly, for me, having worked in government, working on policy and working with different stakeholders, the win is never when one side feels like we totally won and one person feels like decimated. It's always the balance in between. Yeah. And when you do that, there's a feeling of, okay, we both gave a little. It's called compromise, right? And we both came out with something, right? So it's a win-win situation. And I think when it comes to relationships, mm-hmm. getting things done, negotiating, it's always coming with that approach of we both have desires and goals we want to achieve. How can we work together? And we give and take. And I think coming back to what you said earlier, recognizing that we're living in a time now where things are so polarized. And how long is that going to last? It's not going to go very far.
I think it's all about context.
Yeah.
The description that I gave, I believe it's about resolution, certainly relationships.
Yeah.
I think there are times where it's actually reasonable to be uncompromising, not necessarily polarizing, not hyperbolic, but when it comes to, for example, chopping up our green belts and selling it off, that's just wrong. We shouldn't compromise on that.
Yeah.
So there are certain things that I think you have to take a stand and go, you know what, that's wrong, but not just to get into a fight. It's because you actually have a very solid argument behind you for why what the other party is doing is just fundamentally wrong and needs to be stopped.
Yeah.
But when it gets into so many of these debates that I've experienced in this city, I'm sure you've seen them too, whether it be on transportation, on just modes of transportation, on shelters, on so many of these things that are so deeply important. But people get so entrenched in their positions that they view the other as the enemy.
Yeah.
That it doesn't help anyone, including the people you want to help, because then it turns into this hyperbolic, polarizing, awful debate, rather than actually finding a way to help the people you are advocating for. Yeah. And that's why, for example, with the encampment clearings, I so strongly disagreed and continue to with the approach the city took, where they viewed many of the unhoused and their advocates in those parks as people that just needed to be violently swept up and cleared out.
Yeah, it was difficult to watch.
It was awful. It was inhumane. But rather than just hear the voices of those who live near the parks in homes and houses saying we don't want them there, of course I'm empathetic to them. I want to use the parks to bring my kid to play catch and use parks the way that parks should be used as well. I get that. But at the same time, we cannot forget that the folks who were sleeping in the parks didn't want to be there either.
Yeah.
They just didn't have another choice. They don't have homes. And as much as the former mayor and the senior management of the city kept saying that they were going to be moved into safe indoor spaces, they were telling us that they didn't believe that those indoor spaces were safe. They weren't safe.
Right.
The shelter system isn't good enough. And we have to listen to those voices too. So one of the things that I'm doing in the policy development for my platform is, this is a novel approach. I'm not making anything up. I'm actually bringing experts, people who work in all the different respective fields, to develop the platform with me. And therefore, when I and we make an announcement, it'll be helpful. Win or lose, we'll be proud of what we're doing. And that way, we're not going to get into this sort of like polarized debate over, this binary choice about everything. But we're just going to say these are ideas that we believe really will help this city, and hopefully it'll contribute to doing that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's important because having it's so, when we say we need to have a seat at the table, right? Do you have a seat at the table? What does that mean? And it's the different perspectives, it's the different lenses. And so when you're making a decision, an informed decision is one where you've listened to all the people, as many people as possible, and get their input and feedback, because when they say, oh, well, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And that's where policy gets lost. Yes. It's like great ideas, right? Or academics who are like, oh, you're high in your ivory tower, but you don't know what's happening on the ground. And I think that's very pragmatic and important, which leads me to this question. Mayoral superpowers.
Yeah.
Tell me about your thoughts on that.
So I have a different view of how superpowers are achieved than the strong mayor powers. Okay. So I'll begin by saying, I think what the former mayor and Doug Ford did, quietly, without even discussing this with council and the public during the last election, was wrong. Powers that allow for one person in a centralized way to be able to make a decision without the majority concurrence is the antithesis of democracy. I mean, there is no other legislative body in the world that makes decision by minority rule. That is not democracy. There's no form of democracy that would allow for that. And I don't want Toronto to be run that way. So I just think it was fundamentally wrong. I believe that the power, the superpower, as you describe it, of the mayor is the power of influence, the power to convince others to go along with an idea because they inspire and because it's right, and because it's evidence-based, and because it has gained enough public support that others, especially in the political realm, will want to work with you and go in that direction, rather than to intimidate or force or put fear toward them. That's not the way that I want to be mayor. That has been the approach of others. That's not the way that I intend to behave or perform. I just don't think it's right. It's not who I am. I also, and this is the craziest thing about this. It didn't help Toronto. We don't need a strong mayor. We need a strong city. We need the ability to have more say over our own land use policies, our own revenue tools, our own governance framework. We need a different arrangement with the other levels of government when it comes to funding social housing and transit, courts, other services. Our governance framework looks like this right now. It doesn't work. It's dysfunctional. And I intend to advocate to correct that so that everyone who pays taxes knows where their money is invested in, and then knows who to hold to account if they haven't delivered, or who to hopefully congratulate if it is. if they want to. That's up to them.
Yeah.
But that's not the way it works today. And I just think the strong mayor was both anti-democratic, but also was just a ruse. It didn't help anything. It's not going to build any more housing. It's not going to help.
Yeah.
And you know, the last thing I'll say about that is that even if it was effective, and I don't believe it is, do the ends justify the means if you're going to forego democratic values to achieve them?
Yeah.
I that's how it works in other places of the world. It shouldn't happen here.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that for sure. So, I mean, I think that also lends itself to what happened with our subway system. The classic debate, subway or LRT.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And filling in subways that were already dug and all the effort and time. I mean, I think that's something that is a concern for many people. How do you get from point A to point B in a city that is growing, that, you know, requires movement of people?
Yeah. Well, so first things first, I'm going to reverse the cuts to the TTC. Okay. It doesn't, you know, you're not safer if you're waiting for longer periods, standing in the dark, waiting for your bus or on the platform.
Right.
It also doesn't encourage anybody to get back on the TTC after the pandemic has waned. Could you imagine a restaurant that decided we're going to give you really crappy service and raise our prices?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a really good business model. So we're not going to run things that way if I'm mayor. But you know, when it comes to these debates over LRT versus subway versus buses versus all of that, it is just intellectually dishonest. That debate was actually conjured up by Rob Ford and others who wanted a polarizing debate. These are manufactured Nick Cavalis type of debates, where they do an us against them, because it's good politics, but it doesn't create good policy.
Yeah.
The reality is that when you want to create a city that is multimodal and functions and helps people get around, context, again, is important. There are places for subways. There are places for LRTs. There are places for streetcars and buses and bike lanes and sidewalks. There's lots of ways to get around, and we need to make sure that we create a city that functions.
Yeah.
And the more that we get into these petty, stupid, dishonest debates over do you like subways more than LRTs or vice versa, the more we distract ourselves from actually building anything. Yeah. And what happens in the worst case scenario is that then some politicians just make up stuff like Smart Track. And $1.4 billion later, the city ends up being on the hook, paying for what was to be a provincial project. And, you know, 22 stations built in 7 years with no upfront tax dollars demonstrates itself to be unreal. It never was. But we ended up being the way that the province ended up paying for their own project. Just ridiculous. Similarly, in Scarborough, I was advocating for a plan that would have provided more stations to more people in a large part of our city that's underserved for fewer dollars. In other words, we could have used every dollar further and provided more service to more people who currently are stuck on the bus rather than having access to rapid transit like much of the core.
Yeah.
And they've been left with a plan that only provides them 3 stops. They're going to be on the bus for many years because of the transition. They were promised that wasn't going to happen. It's happening. And it's costing more money. And I just don't think we should be making decisions that way. I mean, that's why I advocated for Scarborough. I didn't believe that many of the representatives were telling them the truth about what their choices were.
Yeah, well, it's so hard, right? There's a lot of misinformation and people don't know where to start. And so I think that's something that we really need to get ahead of so that it's clear what's happening and people actually know what to ask or what to look for. And I think this is a bigger piece that we're not going to resolve, but critical thinking, critical analysis, and not polarizing debates.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I wanted to do was I also wanted to ask you, I'm going to totally take this off to another, front, is what's your favorite quote? What's your favorite quote, guiding principle?
Wow. You may stump me because I'm not one who's like, I must admit, like guided by any sort of one quote.
Yeah.
But if it's about a guiding principle, of course I'm inspired by, everyone from Margaret Mead to Jane Jacobs to, Abraham Lincoln to David Crombie.
Yeah.
And I really believe in, if we're honest and upfront with each other, if we take a principled approach to public policy, if we ask for information that doesn't necessarily support the destination that we were hoping to arrive at, but we take a journey that will allow ourselves to follow the evidence and arrive at the right place, that's my guiding principle. And that's how we live at home. Those are the values that we're trying to impart in our daughter.
Yeah.
And by the way, speaking of my daughter, I just thought about critical thinking too, because she's 10, and she often comes to me and tells me what she just saw on TikTok. And she's like, oh my God, did you hear that they're doing this? And I just remind her to maybe check a couple of sources that are credible before you arrive at that conclusion.
Yeah. But they think that if they see it, it's real.
Oh my gosh. And this is what I want to encourage every voter to do during this campaign. You're going to hear so many things from so many people. You're going to hear that we can just solve crime by hiring more cops, rather than actually address the root causes of crime in the first place. You're going to hear that a plan to pay for everything we want is to have Doug Ford upload our highways, even though he already told us he wasn't going to do it. I want him to, but we can't plan for him to do it.
Yeah.
I can't plan for Doug Ford to do anything. I have no idea what he's going to do. So I would just encourage everyone watching this debate unfold over the next 12 weeks. Hopefully it'll be a thoughtful debate. Hopefully it'll be a contest of visions and ideas for our city. But anything that anyone, including myself, including all of us, anything we tell you, don't take it for granted. Check on it. Check other credible sources, and make a decision that you really believe is grounded on reality, not just what something looks like or sounds like.
Yeah. Josh, that's awesome.
Thank you
so much. Thank you for coming today.
I really appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.